Okay. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give to you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So we find this passage in the Gospel of Matthew, right in the story where Jesus has just been baptized by his cousin John the Baptist, and right before Jesus begins his public teaching. We're reading this passage at a time of the year that seems really appropriate because we've just entered into Lent, which is a time in the church calendar where Christians have traditionally fasted for 40 days between now and Easter, giving up something like a particular food or like social media or something. And it's designed to echo this passage right here where we see Jesus fasting for 40 days. Reading this passage, I think, invokes a few questions. The first one might be, who is this Satan character? In the church and in popular culture, I think often we give Satan either too much credit or too little credit. I think we understand him too much or not at all. Satan kind of ends up being a mascot trying to sell like devilishly good chocolate cake, or he ends up being depicted as some kind of all-powerful evil being on par with God, just on the dark side. Hooves and horns and all in red. But that's not really what the Bible shows us. In the Old Testament, we run into this word Satan, the Satan, actually. And it simply means adversary. In the New Testament, in the Greek, we encounter the word the devil, which has a very similar meaning. And I think the best way for us to understand this as Christians is that we really do believe that there is an evil force out there. But it's something more like a parasite, something more like a virus that is trying to bend the good, bend life toward death and away from God. This is what Jesus encounters in the wilderness. And I think it's something we can all relate to encountering in our own lives as we are tempted towards things that we know aren't good for us, where we see how evil seems to creep even into the things we have the best intentions about. Another question that we could ask is, what is this passage telling us about Jesus? And I think it's pretty clear that Matthew's making a connection here between Jesus and the whole story of Israel. And on the one hand, to get that, we would really need to read the whole of the Old Testament, but we don't have time for that, though I highly recommend it. I think what we need to understand is that the key moment in Israel's history is the Exodus, when they leave the slavery of Egypt, pass through the waters of the Red Sea, spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness before they finally enter the life of the Promised Land. In the same way, we see Matthew showing us Jesus pass through the waters of baptism before wandering for 40 days in the wilderness. There's also a term here that the devil uses to talk about Jesus called Son of God. And the first reference to someone being the Son of God is actually God talking about the nation of Israel way back in the Exodus. In some way, Matthew is then saying Jesus is leading us on a new Exodus. But what then of these temptations? The first temptation is basically Satan saying, "Hey, Jesus, you're hungry. Why not use your miraculous power to turn these stones into bread?" But Jesus says, "No, I'm not going to use my power for my selfish ambition, for my own needs. I'm here to serve others, and I'm going to trust in God." The second temptation is Satan, again, saying, "Well, Jesus, why don't you show everyone who you are by just really impressing everyone by doing this miraculous leap off the top of the temple? God will catch you. But Jesus says, no, I'm not going to coerce people in that way. I'm not going to try and impress them with a spectacle. I'm not going to manipulate God that way. I'm not going to manipulate people that way. The last temptation is in some ways the most obvious. Satan says, I'll give you all the power you need to do what you want. Just worship me. I'll give you money. I'll give you military power. I'll give you all that the kingdoms of the earth have to offer. But Jesus says no, because he realizes that's not the power that's needed to bring about the kingdom of heaven. Jesus realizes there's no amount of military power or money or prestige that it can accomplish the purposes of the kingdom of heaven. That he cannot accomplish the things of the kingdom of God through the powers of this world. So in the end, what this passage shows us is that Jesus is leading us in a new exodus, where we can refuse the temptation towards the ways of death, and we can choose a path of life, where we don't have to be selfish and self-centered, but where we can trust in God and serve others, where we don't have to show off and try and impress others, try and manipulate people to get what we want, but where we can walk humbly, and where we don't have to chase after the power of money or prestige or power, but where we understand the power of the kingdom of God, which consists in humble, loving service. Now, there's much more that this passage says, but I think that's enough for today, to know that we can refuse the temptation toward the way of death, and we can choose the new exodus toward life in Jesus.